If you're looking at what the museum itself offers, what you see is translatable in any language. You're either going to be wowed or you're not, and you don't need to be able to speak Chinese, Spanish, or English to be able to have the exact same effect. It's sort of a universal expression to people of not just all ages, as I was mentioning before, but really all cultures.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking.
You bet. You bet.
And how are you?
I am fantastic.
Woo! Yeah,
Yes.
that bottled in there. Yeah.
I know. I was just waiting. But hey, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you like magic?
I do like magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever dabbled in sleight of hand or card tricks or anything else like that?
I think I've done the most basic of the basic card tricks. So recently I was on an airplane from Philadelphia to Chicago. I was not doing magic on the plane, but the gentleman sitting next to me used to do a vaudeville and magic act at Knoebels
Really?
like years ago. And he now does that act in a burlesque show in Atlantic City.
Very cool.
Yeah, so he sent me a link to his act on YouTube, and just his part of the act. He comes out, he does his act, he goes, and then there's a comedian, and then there's the burlesque show, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know if that's like an upgrade or a promotion or just naturally like the progression of his career, but that's what's just top of mind right now because it was pretty good. It was pretty impressive.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So he's basing his livelihood on creating illusions for other people.
Well said. Yes.
Thank you. I did dabble when I was younger with some magic.
Okay.
I had one that, I know you're not supposed to give away the secret, but there was a trick where you had a small box, and then inside of that was a smaller box. Then inside of that was a little bag. Okay. And then, so the trick was you got a penny from someone and you mark on it so that they know it's theirs. And then you put it in a pocket and you pull out this box and you unwrap and open the box and everything. And their coin is inside the box. And of course, while it's in your pocket, I will give away this little secret. There's a little slide. So you build the trick by putting all those boxes in the bag together. And then inside there's a little metal slide that when it's in your pocket, you could slide the coin in. And when you pull the slide out of the boxes, like there's a rubber band around the little bag. So it'll squeeze shut. So when you open it up, it looks like the bag is completely shut and the thing is there, and you leave the slide in your pocket. So there's a little sleight of hand. There's a little bit of illusion there. So I did dabble in that. And it's something that came to mind today during our interview with Jonathan Benjamin, also known as JB, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Museum of Illusions. They have over 40 locations in 25 countries, I believe. And they're all about tricking the eye. Ooh.
The illusion.
And the illusion.
this was such a fascinating conversation because Jonathan, or JB's experience, his background is very much in other areas of hospitality. So he came from hotels and restaurants, very proficient in franchising, which is what he's currently doing with Museum of Illusions. Worked in trampoline parks for a little bit, and then since joining Museum of Illusions, they've grown to, like you said, more than 40 locations in 25 countries all over the world, and continuing to expand. He tells us he at the end of this interview, he just gives us a smattering of a whole bunch of other cities and regions that Museum of Illusions is coming to. It's kind of like the opposite of now you see it, now you don't. Like they're just springing up everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't say, that was terrible. But the conversation we got to have with him was wonderful. We got to learn about what the experience is like. We got to hear about certain illusions and exhibits within the museum. And notice the word museum is very much part of it, because on the surface, this seems like it's an immersive walkthrough attraction, maybe even like an art installation, almost like some of the other similar ones that we've talked about on the show. But he said they're partnering with STEM and STEAM organizations, and that they do field trips with schools. And instead of going to, I would say, the traditional science center, that the kids are coming here, and instead of having to leave their phones away, they're encouraged to have them out, be taking pictures, be posting on social media. I would say it's a very Instagrammable type of experience to be able to show people things that really look like they defy reality, particularly as they're captured and they're memorialized in our phones and on our social media.
And one of the things I really appreciated about how he described the experience was that, yes, you bring your phone, you can take pictures, and interact with the exhibits, and they are interactive, they are immersive, as he described them, but many of them are based on illusions that have been around for hundreds of years, right? Things that maybe your grandparents or their grandparents or your ancestors may have been thinking about, or it was an illusion to them. And what I thought was really interesting about that is that there's that, the what's old is new again, and there's a new way to package these illusions. There's a new way to create an experience around these things that are oddities, or things that, kind of make you say, wow, or when you leave the experience, you might say, what did I just experience? Which makes you want to maybe go back and do it again. So I really appreciated, where a lot of these things come from, and the fact that it is, something that every age group can enjoy, and that, you can, get some education from it, but it's also just some fun.
Yeah. And I think, based on the way you described it, it gives this whole new level of appreciation for, I would say, for the craft of illusions, right? I don't know about you, but whenever I ride Haunted Mansion, either at Magic Kingdom or at Disneyland, I'm always just so amazed by the Pepper's ghost effects. And whenever you go through that scene in the dining room, I'm looking down to see if I can see that. Well, I'm not going to give away that if you're not totally familiar with it, but there's ghosts in there, right? And the ghosts appear and they disappear and things like that. That's what it reminded me of when JB talks about those types of illusions that have been around for hundreds of years, but like you said, what's old is new again, and we can really appreciate it at all ages and across all languages and all cultures, as well as they continue to expand all over the world.
So should we dispense with the illusion and allow JB to share all of his thoughts and the experience of Museum of Illusions?
Let's do it. Hey, JB, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We are very excited to chat with you today. How are you?
Great. How about you, Josh?
Doing very well. So jumping into this here, can you share a little bit of your background? Tell us about your career and your history in the industry.
Sure. Well, I think I can probably start the legitimate part of it. With the hotels and restaurants. I've been with some global chains, both in the hotel and restaurant industry for many years, and then did some retail and family entertainment with trampoline parks and some other type of industries, and was able to then leap into the Museum of Illusions area, which is also family entertainment and attraction based. It's a little unique in the sense that there's really nothing else out there like us, and at the same time, we're relatively new. So from that standpoint, we started the industry in 2015, and we've grown into 25 countries now with 45 open locations and many, many more that are under construction or spoken for around the world.
That's so cool. JB, can you tell us a little bit about maybe the transition from your initial part of the career now into attractions and fully immersed into the Museum of Illusions?
Sure. I think, overall, if you're looking for a type of background on how to lead this type of venture, you really have to have hospitality. You have to have a knowledge of who your customer is, how to speak with them, how to market to them, et cetera. And I don't think there's more of a training ground that is more relevant than restaurants and hotels. I mean, these are where new people are coming in all the time with all sorts of different likes and dislikes and personalities, et cetera. And you've really got to be able to adapt and accommodate to whatever their needs and desires are. And you've got to be able to speak their language. And there's a lot of different languages to speak. So if you're looking to host attractions, it's very transferable with a lot of those skills and having that knowledge base. You have to be able to, again, adapt to whatever their needs are, have quite a bit of hospitality, social skills, et cetera. And some of it can be trained, and some of it is just natural. So as we're looking at deploying new locations and employing the right people, those are a lot of the attributes that we look for.
Mm.
I like that you really touched on the hospitality piece, because that definitely is, I would say, the common denominator between all of these industries or areas of the industry that you've been in, whether it's a restaurant, hotel, trampoline park, or Museum of Illusion. Coming from the restaurant hotel space, curious though if there were any surprises or any learning curves that perhaps you hadn't anticipated of going from hotels and restaurants and then into trampoline parks, which is now, I would say, more like recreation-based entertainment, and then very similarly into Museum of Illusions.
Surprises, no. I mean, I think it was a real natural progression, to be quite frank. I mean, it's in many instances, it's the same people that are visiting our museums who are then planning on going to a restaurant afterwards, or maybe having stopped at a restaurant beforehand. It's family entertainment, but it's also appeals to all ages. So whether it's children or grandparents or everyone in between, everyone likes to eat, everyone likes to stay in hotels, everyone likes to have experiences. And we offer something that's rather unique, I think, compared to what someone else might assume to be a museum visit. So it's more immersive. And there's the trend these days for immersive experiences that we are riding the wave of.
JB, I'm curious if we can go back just for a second, because you said something I thought was really interesting that I'd like to dive into a little deeper. You talked about in hospitality, some of it can be trained, some of it is more natural. So as you're looking for staff, are you looking for people that have sort of that natural twinkle in their eye, if you will, that you can train them on the skills versus maybe the other way around?
Matt, that's the million-dollar question, because I think, as you know, your employees are really the heartbeat of any organization. I don't even care what type of business it is. And they have to be engaging, but at the same time, they've got to be able to read the room, read the guests, so to speak. There's no one size fits all approach. And some of those things are just you're born with. Maybe you might hone it a little bit, or adapt some styles. But there are just certain things that you cannot train. And if you're glued to your phone, or you're more introverted and not wanting to interact with people or guests, probably not the right candidate to work in our museum. or frankly, even restaurants or hotels. You know, there's many studies that you're probably already aware of that point to, you know, how engaging the employees are and how it translates into top line revenue and and frankly guest satisfaction.
Can you expand on that and the engagement of the employees leading into top line revenue for those who perhaps hadn't seen those studies?
Well, you know, I think the more, let's just say the more satisfying the experience is, the more likely those customers are going to post positive reviews, comments, tell their friends, tell their family, and return. So in every instance, if they return, that's additional revenue. If they tell their friends and family, that's additional revenue. If they're posting comments that are positive, then anyone who's out looking for things to do, if they see good reviews, they're more likely to attend. And conversely, for those types of businesses that don't have that word of mouth, don't have the repeat customers, don't have the positive reviews, it's, I mean, it's pretty obvious, I think, to most people that people are going to choose to go somewhere else because of that.
Yeah. So, JB, do you have specific strategies that you employ within your organization to help find the right people, train the right people, make sure they're on the right path, you know, that kind of thing?
We do. I mean, those are things that I would typically leave to our operations folks. So they've got a model of the people that they're looking for to lead in every single museum. It's you know, leading by example. I think it's also being very selective in the interview process, and it's applying proper training techniques at the outset, and then a constant monitoring of the environment and providing in many instances instant feedback to the employees as they're walking the floor and interacting with guests.
So I would love to pull back a bit if we can. You know, you talked about Museum of Illusions, you know, just being, you said relatively new, kind of the first one opened in 2015, and now with 45 locations all over the world. Can you tell us what's the experience like? It sounds like it's a very unique type of attraction. Can you walk us through kind of what, you know, what people experience when they're at the museum?
Well, I can. I think it's even better to be able to walk you through as you're experiencing it yourself, but I'll try my best. Basically, you're walking into a facility where there are exhibits, pictures, hands-on exhibits that you can manipulate and interact with, where it's hard for your brain to really comprehend what's really going on. It's not anything that is high tech, for example. So it's not you're not having high definition video being broadcast on walls and floors, but it's objects that you're looking at that don't make sense, but at the same time you're looking at it and experiencing it. So I think what people have done is as they've grown up, they've learned to associate forms, objects, just by vision or touch, and they just don't make sense. So think of in fine art, for example, there might be a Salvador Dali painting or something like that you know, sort of defies logic. But in our sense, it's using geometry, some math, some art, lighting techniques, etc., that help form these optical illusions that are being transcribed on your brain, and it really is in many instances a wow type of experience of I don't believe what I'm seeing, but yet there it is. And in some instances, it actually involves some kind of physical stimulation as well, where you might be standing still and you're not moving at all, yet you might feel a little bit dizzy, or the room is moving, or something like that. It's really it's really quite amazing. You have to experience it firsthand. Um, and what we do is we pack our museum with, at least 70 to 100 types of different visual and exhibits to be able to stimulate your brain to the point where when you're walking out, you might have a favorite one, or you might be talking about something. But even then, it's very experiential because you're feeling it, you're seeing it. But on the other hand, you actually go in and you're able to take pictures of it, take videos of it, to memorialize it, or to share it with friends and family. We have a lot of people that do that through their social media, et cetera, which is a lot of fun. You're showing pictures to your connections that just defy reality. Um, and that's just for, I think, the general audience. One of the things that we also do is we encourage um, school children to come in during the school year, field trips, et cetera. And I don't know what your experience was when you were growing up and you would go on a field trip with your school. Everybody packs into the school bus and with their lunches and everything like that. Here, this is an experience where the kids are actually encouraged to take pictures, to bring their phone, to do things where they might share or manipulate some of the pictures that they take, etc. Many of our locations, where available, are able to actually uh, satisfy STEAM and STEM requirements for the local school boards, and we are able to provide planning books for the teachers to be able to help the children understand and associate certain things that they're looking at with some of the lessons that they're learning, whether it's geometry or art or math or engineering or other science. And it makes it a lot more fun for the children. The parents love it, the teachers love it. It's really an amazing experience for people of all ages, but that's one of the ones that we're most proud of.
Well, you definitely make me want to go experience one. I'm sorry to say I have not been to a Museum of Illusions yet, but you also got me thinking back to my field trips. And one of the things I remember was not the destination, but was the can of soda wrapped in tinfoil. I don't know if that for some people that remember that from that age. But anyway, JB, what I'm hearing you talk about in terms of this experience is very, as you said, experiential. It's very immersive, very visceral, in terms of the feelings that you get. And I appreciate that 100%. But I also look at a lot of things that people talk about right now, which is AI and virtual reality and things that are going that way. And I appreciate that yours is more physical and again emotional, and it doesn't take super technology. Some of this is, for lack of a better term, old school. So I'm curious where you think that type of attraction is going in terms of immersion, where you're not counting on AI. At least it doesn't sound like it from your description. AI and virtual reality and things like that other people are calling the kind of the hot buttons and the new technology and the new things that quote unquote everybody seems to be going for.
Yeah, and Matt, that's a good point. I look at the success of some of those other opportunities or some of the other experiences as more of a parallel track with us. There's certain differentiators, as you alluded to, and I mentioned earlier as well, to the extent where it's more or less high definition video in many instances that is projected onto walls, floors. There's some music sequences and some other flashing photography, et cetera, which is quite a bit different. That is almost exclusively technology based, and I think is also very enjoyable. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit more transitory. So, for example, a lot of the popular ones you'll see out there, uh, there's an industry term called pop-ups, where they might be there for 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years at the most. and they'll go through their cycle and then move it on to another location. Whereas we're more permanent. What we try to do is we integrate within the community. It's in many instances, it's exhibits that we might rotate from location to location from time to time, or rotate some new exhibits that are being developed by our research and development department, and maybe retire or temporarily shelve some other exhibits. But these are things that are permanent. They're not manipulated by AI or photography or high definition or anything like that. These are things that you can actually feel and touch and see and be able to experience, not just visually or by audio, but from other senses, where it helps you. I think in many ways identify more with it. One of the things, Matt, you mentioned as well, old school. Old school in the sense that many of these exhibits that we have were actually invented hundreds of years ago. So it's not like it's something that maybe your grandparents enjoyed, but maybe even your ancestors enjoyed. And we found a really good vehicle to be able to display these things in an environment that is really conducive to the rest of the experience.
Hmm.
And I think that type of experience allows people, particularly, I would say, children or Gen Z who are growing up with, so much technology and AI just at their fingertips, gives them the appreciation of what can be done or what was developed hundreds of years ago that was cutting edge technology back then, right? Of being able to create, this type of these types of illusions and these types of different types of experiences. I do kind of want to tie this with something you mentioned a few minutes ago about, the kids on the field trips. They're encouraged to bring their phones with them so they can take the pictures. They can either share it on social media or with their connections of these images that look like they defy reality. I want to tie that in with kind of the generational relevance of it. You were recently quoted in Forbes talking about the importance of focusing on Gen Z as a long-term growth strategy. Would love to know, I would say, how Gen Z fits into just your overall strategy.
Yeah, and I think Gen Z is just part of it, but certainly one of the most important parts. They grew up as digital natives. They have a means of communication and different environments that they grew up in, that older generations are actually kind of learning, or maybe even a little bit of a fishbowl, looking into to see what the heck is going on in there. And for us, it's multi-generational. With Gen Z in particular, I think I have a bit of an advantage because I've got 3 Gen Z children. And sometimes it's just a means of being able to communicate. And as someone who is older than a Gen Z, for example, I find that the easiest and most comfortable way to communicate with them is on their terms. So people complain about it, but I might be sitting at the table with them at a restaurant and they're on their phones, and if I send them a text, all of a sudden they're engaging with me, and it's only because they're tuned out if I'm speaking to them verbally. But we have this back and forth where we can interact with each other. They'll get a clue. Okay, well, it's time to engage and all of these things. But it's one where at Museum of Illusions, we have the ability to have not just Gen Z, but other generations interact really in the same environment without clashing. It's something that appeals to, I think, virtually every generation that I can think of, who has an appreciation of what it is that we offer without necessarily having to cross into something strange or unfamiliar that deals with technology, or that has a complete lack of technology if you're looking from the other side.
Well, I think part of that appeal to multiple generations probably comes from the fact that, like you said, a lot of these things have been around for a while, these illusions, and they impact people probably at some level in very similar ways, right? You know, whether you're young or you're old, your eyes are still seeing it. It's not registering with your brain quite right. Maybe it does make you feel queasy or dizzy. And obviously from person to person, that could be a little different, but you know, we all kind of see some of those things in slightly similar ways, I would imagine, you know, no matter what our age is. But one thing you just touched on that I think a lot of people, maybe not so much recently, but I know I've heard a lot of people talk about, you know, complaining about the new generation, whatever you want to call them, right? But you said in so many words, you can either complain about them or you can teach them. That's what kind of how I interpreted what you said. So how does that even transfer over into the workplace? Because you've got those same folks working with you that maybe, you know, their native communication maybe on their phone or what they gravitate toward. So now you've got a young person who you want to interact with your guests. So how do you then, you know, create the environment where it's more acceptable and obviously more of what you want for them to interact with your guests than to be on the phone or to not engage?
That's a good question, Matt. And that's a really probably more complicated than the answer I'm going to give you. But I think a part of it goes back to what I was saying earlier about reading the room. You know, being able to engage more forcefully if welcomed, and maybe not so forcefully if you can read the room and say, okay, these people just kind of want to be left alone. But I think if you're looking at older generations, for example, and I know this just from my own family, they struggle a little bit with some of the technology that's out there, and so they're always looking for help. How do I do this? How do I turn this? I mean, how do I edit this photograph that I just took? And sometimes it's a matter of just asking them if they can be shown on their smartphone, and they're learning new tools on how to use the technology that they already have that they might only be using on a limited basis, and so they're very appreciative of it. In other instances, if you're dealing with people who are intimately familiar with that type of technology, it's a matter of just speaking with them and just saying, hey, you know what, if you open this and turn it that way, well, oh yeah, I'll try that. And it's just you know, being able to adapt. I think I don't care what kind of business you're in. There's no one size fits all approach, but it's being able to be on the same plane with the person or group that you're trying to engage with that I think makes it most satisfying for the guest. As far as the employees are concerned, let's go back to the first part of your question. I think that we learn as much from our employees as I think they learn from us. So they can learn the concept, but we are far from a point where we would ever say we know everything. And you know, I think there's lessons to be learned every day, and I think that some of the best ways we learn about the community and the customers is just by listening to the input from our employees, and we welcome their contribution, and we have, you know, sort of an open AI environment where those type of inputs are not only welcome, but they're also encouraged.
I'm curious then, with the amount of locations that you have and with your continued growth strategy, everything that you just shared there, of being able to manage that and keeping that consistent and continuing to value that employee input as the number of employees continues to grow at scale and the number of locations and the number of regions continue to grow, of being able to continue to, I'd say, hone in on that and being able to learn from your employees and valuing their, or being able to even just gather their input to be able to get that information to be able to learn from them.
Well, it's hard. I mean, first of all, we have to deal with corporate locations as well as franchise locations. So for us, it's getting input from business owners, and we are also a business owner, so we're also seeing it firsthand from the museums that we own and manage. And what we do is we have input from the owners of those franchises typically, and are able to compare notes. We have a very collaborative franchise environment where we learn also from our franchisees things that work, things that may not work so well, and we also are able to apply our knowledge and expertise to help them succeed. Um, but I think the biggest challenge is really being able to, uh, you know, I think adapt these in different languages, in different currencies, et cetera. So it's more of a technical operational aspect that is the challenge. If you're looking at what the museum itself offers, you know, what you see is translatable in any language. You're either going to be wowed or you're not, and you don't need to be able to speak Chinese, Spanish, or English to be able to have the exact same effect. It's sort of a universal expression to people of not just all ages, as I was mentioning before, but really all cultures. And sometimes it's trying to adapt to the local culture, a type of exhibit that we might have that might be a little bit more expressive with a different color scheme, for example, or a different type of background that makes it a little bit more uh, I welcome in the community, or something that's a little bit more recognizable. So as we go around the world, and even in different regions of a single country like the United States, we try to adapt the environment to some of the local landmarks or some of the local hometown heroes, or things that would appeal to the people locally. You know, one of the things that I think surprises most people who are getting to know us is they really think we're, you know, tourist driven, and certainly we welcome tourists, and there's certain locations we have that, the obvious ones like Orlando, for example, that where the entire city is practically tourist driven. But the majority of our customers actually come from the local communities, and I think it's part of our DNA to try to assimilate within the community, and part of it is to be able to help design the museums that are reflective of some of the cultures and important elements that the community represents.
JB, I'm curious, and forgive me if I keep coming back to the employees, but you keep saying things that spark these thoughts in my mind, and I'm just curious about some things from your perspective. You talk about having facilities all over the world and adapting to the local culture. Again, I would imagine that also translates to the team members that you're employing there as well. So what challenges have you found, or maybe opportunities, in those different cultures when you're trying to adapt to not only the culture of your demographic of guests, but also your team members?
So surprisingly, very little. You know, I think in many instances, I don't want to say the product speaks for itself, because in many ways it does, but at the same time, you can't take that for granted. You've got to be able to, you know, market it and communicate in whatever the local language might be, through whatever the local customs might be, et cetera. So what we've done is we've, you know, employed whatever local expertise might be helpful or necessary, whether it's consulting, whether it's local PR firms, the franchisees themselves that typically come from those communities that are able to speak to, you know, what may or what may not appeal to those. But you know, I don't think there's, you know, I don't think there's probably as much of a challenge as someone might think. It's quite adaptable.
JB, can you share a little bit more about Museum of Illusions' growth strategy? Because we talk about, we say at this time you're in 40 plus locations, 25 countries. Can you talk a little bit about, I would say, how the company has continued to accelerate growth? You talk about the franchise model, but also just being able to tap into new regions, new cities, new communities, and be able to develop the museums in new locations.
Well, I can. In many ways, it was a bit of a renaissance for us. in the sense that we opened a single location with our founders in Zagreb, Croatia. Zagreb's like the capital city there. That's where it all began. And by virtue of a number of the visitors that came in, as well as the lines that were forming around the block just to experience this, the founders were approached by people from around the world saying, we'd really like one of these in New York, or we'd really like to do one of these in Paris. What are your expansion plans? And it was, I think, in some ways, a happy surprise to the founders to discover that this was something that potentially could have some worldwide appeal. And so what that sparked was a strategy of franchising, and from there they grew to a number of locations on multiple continents in multiple countries, and got to a point where they had reached some type of critical mass where there was going to either be a stoppage in development, or it was going to maybe get a little bit unwieldy or out of control. I mean, with franchisees, you've got to provide help, support, expertise, et cetera. And that began their solicitation of potential partners who could come in and bring that expertise. Happy to say that approximately 18 months ago, there's a local company, private equity company in Vera Equity Partners, that bought a majority stake in the business to really help foster that next wave of growth, and apply a little bit more of a professional element to it, in the sense that we were not going to be reactive, we were actually going to be proactive. So we would put some sort of science behind the growth pattern, where we would explore demographics, preferences, trends, obviously populations and buying power in certain areas, to be able to duplicate that strategically around the world. And one of the first things we did was actually target the top markets around the globe based on a lot of those factors, some of which are kind of secret sauce that I can't divulge. But it gave us the impetus to be able to actually select certain markets around the world for growth. And one of the things that we're experiencing now is a tremendous amount of that growth based on the research that we did 18 to 24 months ago. Parallel to that, we also had a number of very successful franchisees who also wanted to continue to grow, and in many instances are now opening their third, fourth, fifth, sixth location because of that. And with them, we find a tremendous amount of synergy, in the sense that they really dominate the markets that they're in, and we're very appreciative of what they've been able to do for the brand. And we also continue to carry the torch and focus a little bit more on the corporate expansion, which was not really a strategy that was done until it was taken over by Invera.
So JB, one of the things I'm curious about as you're expanding and you are, working with all these different facilities and kind of leading the charge in the expansion, somebody could look from the outside and say, wow, that's something that I'd like to do. I'd like to have that kind of influence, or, try to understand what it takes to be in that type of position. So I'm curious, what sort of advice or guidance do you have for people that are kind of coming up through the industry that may want to, be as involved in an operator plus a franchise business, or just be an executive in the hospitality industry?
Well, I think it's a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, and I think it's thinking differently. I don't think this is a good field for someone who just wants to toe the corporate line, so to speak. You've got to be able to think, I hate to use the cliche, but out of the box, You've got to be able to take some risks. But also, I think more importantly, try to associate yourself with those type of people. I mean, I found that throughout my career, I've always been able to find individuals who were willing to share advice, share tactics, etc. You know, some formally, some informally, but there's mentorships out there. I've actually taken it upon myself to, I don't want to say give back, but also take, you know, some of those learnings and be able to share it with a lot of the colleagues that I currently work with and have worked with in the past. One of the most gratifying things I can tell you personally is being able to go to some of these industry events, for example, and it's almost like a gathering of people who you've grown up with in the industry in the past, who have risen to very high ranks within the organizations that they're with. Um, and it's having that kind of support and those type of colleagues that I think are also now doing the same thing with people. Sometimes it's identifying just someone who you think is a star in your company that, you know, needs some mentorship and growth, and even exposing them to things that might not be within the scope of their exact position, but it's something that you know will help them develop more as a professional with that type of experience, to allow themselves to, you know, become future leaders within this or other related type of industries. It's really remarkable how much I benefit from that, and I think that I conversely like to share that as well.
And thank you for sharing. That's all phenomenal advice, and we really appreciate it. We're starting to run a little low on time, but we would love to know, do you have a favorite illusion that you like to share with others?
Well, I do, but I don't want to limit it to just one. But if I had to pick one, it's goodness. You ask me tomorrow, it might be a different one. I'd say our building illusion. So it's one where you know, you could probably go online and look and see what some of those look like, but it's a gigantic mirror that is applied to a diagonal wall, where the elements of the illusion are actually on the ground. And what you're doing is you're taking the photograph of how you look in the mirror, and you might look like you're scaling a building, for example, or hanging off the preface of a balcony or something, and you're really just lying on the floor. But the illusion, the visual of that is really quite remarkable and raises a lot of eyebrows. Makes my mother scared to see me hanging off of a ledge of a 10-story building, for example. So it's ask me tomorrow and I'll give you a different answer.
All right. Well, we're gonna call you tomorrow and just to see what you say there. But JB, this has been really interesting, and again, really inspires me to want to go visit one of these museums of illusions. But as Josh said, we're running a little low on time. So if people wanted to learn more about Museum of Illusions, or they wanted to contact you directly, where would you send them?
Probably send them to LinkedIn. My profile is easily available. They can reach out to me at at museumofillusions.com. I think they're probably going to get the most information just going to our website, which is museumofillusions.com. And hopefully visiting one of our locations. You'll see all of our existing and opening soon locations on the website. We've opened several this year. We're about to open 2 more this month, actually, one in Las Vegas and one in Houston, and then followed on its close heels by Denver in September. I think also Bordeaux, France in September, along with San Diego and Copenhagen. Between now and the end of the year, we just recently opened Atlanta, which isn't far from where you live, and I'd certainly love to show you a good time if you want to drive down from the mountains.
Absolutely.
We opened recently in Minneapolis, Austin, Montreal, Marseille, just to name a few, just this year alone. So we're on a high growth trajectory, as you know, and we aim to have 100 open locations by the end of 2026. We're well ahead of that pace right now.
Wow. So if you don't have a location near you, just because sounds like one is coming close by, or at least to the nearest major market.
Yes,
Excellent.
exactly.
JB, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and learn about your career and your background and your guest experience and employee experience philosophies and just everything about Museum of Illusions. So thank you. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.
Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.